Andrew, the old question of why is there something rather than nothing has been the question that has haunted me my whole life and has been one of the foundational themes of Closer to Truth. And let me put it to you this way. How can we exclude the concept that nothing is the simplest and most logical step, and when one thinks about the existence of everything, the fact that there should be anything at all is astonishing?
Well, I think to answer that question, first of all, we need to think about the nature of explanation. Because when we ask the question why is there something rather than nothing, the word why itself is actually asking for an explanation, right? Mm-hmm. So for example, if you ask, why did Andrew Loke exist, right? Why do I exist? Well, you can say that the reason why I exist is because my parents, right, brought me to existence, right? If you ask, why did my parents exist, right? They will say that my parents' parents, my grandparents, brought them into existence. Now, the cosmological argument shows that there cannot be an infinite regress, right? Because there cannot be an infinite regress of dependency. Because, so for example, if I depend on my parents, and my parents depend on my parents' parents, right, then nothing would ever begin to exist because a dependence regress is a vicious regress. And so therefore, this regress must be terminated by something that is not dependent on anything else. And so this will be an independent first cause, which explains why there are other things which begin to exist. And this first cause itself will not require an explanation because it is the first cause and it has no beginning. And since something has no beginning, it doesn't require another thing to explain why it exists because it just is. And so there must be a kind of brute fact or something that is uncaused and something that's without beginning. And the Kalam argument shows that this thing must also have libertarian freedom to bring about the first events, and therefore is the creator.
Yeah, at this point, I really don't care what it is. I just want to know anything, something. Doesn't have to be a creator. It doesn't have to be the universe, but it has to be something rather than nothing. That's all I care about to answer this question. And you're going through an argument that says that there has to be something that's necessary.
Yes.
Okay, and what that necessary thing is a separate issue.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm just saying, is there? What can you do to say that there is something necessary? That's the critical question. So let me put it this way: if we had, it's a very complicated thought experiment. If we had, if you were divorced from the fact that there is existence, and you had no sense that there is existence, the argument that you're giving to this sequence of events, you couldn't do that because you had nothing there. So wouldn't it be the case that nothing would be the most logical, the easiest thing to explain if you didn't have the data that there is something? The fact that we start with that we know there's something prejudices us.
I don't see this as a prejudice, but rather I see this as a realization of that's what reality is, right? That the fact that we do exist and that we are talking now, for example. You're talking about, whereas you're talking about logical possibility, right? You're saying that, well, we can imagine that there's a state where there is nothing, and we can conceive of such a state. And I want to say that, okay, so even if we grant that nothingness is logically possible, that doesn't mean that it's actual, right? I mean, what is logically possible doesn't mean that it's actual.
Of course.
So in order to consider what is actual, we have to look at the evidence, and the evidence can include empirical experience, for example. And so there's no way of denying that I'm having an experience right now of talking to you.
Right.
And so this experience then therefore exists and need to be explained, and there cannot be an infinite regress of events, and therefore they must arrive at the.
But even if there were an infinite regress, even if you allowed that, and many philosophers and thinkers, even in the Christian tradition, have allowed that an infinite regress is possible, they would say God is responsible for the whole process. But irrespective of that, there would still be, in that infinite universe, nothing necessary.
So
therefore, you need to terminate the infinite regress to make your point that there has to be something necessary.
Yeah, which is my argument. So I've given a few arguments to show that there cannot be infinite regress, and therefore there must be something necessary. And that will be the answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah, does that first cause, though, have to be necessary as opposed to brute fact? There's a difference between brute fact and necessary.
Yes.
Brute fact is, it's just there, we don't know, we can't put any label on it. And we can't go beyond that. But you go beyond that and you say it is necessary.
Yes, it is necessary because if you think about, I mentioned, so if you think about contingencies, for example, right? Contingent things or events will be things that are not necessary. But then those will be dependent on other things.
Right.
And my argument is that these dependencies cannot be an infinite regress. It must start with something that is not dependent, which means that it is necessary in that sense.
So is that logically coherent to say that because there is no infinite regress, that it has to stop with something as an initial start, that has to be necessary, as opposed to that is just a brute fact? There's a difference between necessary and a brute fact.
Yeah.
A brute fact can be necessary, but a brute fact by its definition doesn't have to be necessary, because that's what brute fact is. We can't go beyond it.
So we need to ask, what is this brute fact? Is this brute fact contingent or necessary, right?
You're forcing it into one of two categories. But I'm saying brute fact by its definition doesn't have the categories, because that's what a brute fact is.
Yeah, a brute fact is something that is unexplained.
It's a stone wall. You can't go further than that. That's what a brute fact is.
Yeah.
Which is different than a necessary thing.
Yeah. So, so my argument actually shows that, because my argument, as I said just now, can be understood as a contingency argument.
Yes.
And
then I follow.
Yeah. And so this contingency argument implies that there must be something that is not contingent. So it's not just merely a brute fact, but it is something that is independent of anything else. And it also must be. It also must exist in such a way that not only is it independent, but that it cannot fail to exist in order to be the ground of things that do and can fail to exist. And so it will be necessary in that sense.
Yeah, well, you're giving a tautology, because that's what necessary means. It cannot fail to exist. It exists in every possible world.
Yeah.
All these definitions are different ways to explain the concept of necessity. All I'm saying is that the product of your argument doesn't seem to absolutely require a necessity, but would need to be terminated in a brute fact. And a brute fact is a bigger subset than a necessary. So there are brute facts that are necessary brute facts, but I can't determine that, because a brute fact is sort of a permanent barrier to my capacity to know, even in principle. It's not that the human brain is not strong enough, or I'm not smart enough, which I'm not smart enough, but irrespective of all of that, a brute fact means, in principle, you cannot go beyond it to characterize it.
Yeah. So, we can go into details of the argument to see whether the justification against infinite regress will lead to brute fact that is not only brute but also necessarily as well. I mean, we can explore that. But in any case, such a brute fact will be the answer to the question, why is there something rather than nothing, right? So that the creator God exists regardless of whether this God is necessary or not, right? But he will be the answer to the question.
Okay, now you're sneaking God into it as well.
Oh, I'm not sneaking in God, because I already explained just now that this brute fact will have to be a first cause, following the premise of my argument, that this first cause will have libertarian freedom in order to bring about the first event.
Okay, but that's an additional complexity.
Yeah, but that follows from the premise of my argument. Yeah, and so we will arrive at the first cause, which is a first cause with a freedom of will. So regardless of whether this first cause is necessary or not, right? But he will be a kind of creator God, and he will be the answer to the question, why there's something rather than nothing.